Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you today in order to our new LAFA conference, which is Demystifying Due Diligences. And I would like to thank Alex Redding, the organizer of this show, who welcomed us here in this fantastic location. And also I would like to thank Eric Perru, which is here, David Arendt, who was a part of the person who, and Mathilde Drie, who are part of the board of LAFA, and they did a job of this superb conference today. And also, I would like to thank the speakers, Aude Lemogne, Meyer, Emmanuel van der Putte, and Dr. Stephan Zilkens. Our guests will be certainly introduced by my Vice President, Dr. Eric Perru, who will be the moderator tonight. I hope you will learn a lot of things about art and law, and I would like to thank you again for LAFA. Have a great day and enjoy this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. I'm delighted to be able to moderate the conference and to introduce you eminent speakers who have agreed to answer our questions. Firstly, I would like to thank Mrs. Aude Lemogne for agreeing to take part in this conference. Aude is Director of Link Management, member of the Board of Directors of AXA Wealth Europe, graduated from HEC Paris with a master's degree in finance and studied art history at Lille University. Aude is assisting financial institutions in integration art in their asset allocations since she co-founded Link Management in 2009. Since then, Aude is a recognized and preferred art advisor for private banks and assists high net worth individuals on the implementation and management of their collections. In particular, she built an extensive network of art experts to perform through due diligence and provide appraisal of works of art ranging from Impressionism until contemporary art. Previously, she was a proprietary trader and senior sales specialist, risk arbitrage, event-driven equity strategy in New York and London for 8 years. Aude is also a member of advisory board of the Responsible Art Market Initiative, RAM in Geneva, that establishes and implements best practice for the art trade. Then let me introduce Maitre Glenn Meyer, partner in the banking and financial service practice of Arendt and Medernach. He advises banks, investment firms, payment and electronic money institutions, as well as other professionals of the financial sector of all types of financial regulatory matters, as well as on general banking law. He also handles various types of mergers and acquisitions and asset acquisition files in the financial sector. Glenn also acquired, over the years, considerable knowledge and expertise in the regulatory framework relating to the combat against money laundering and terrorist financing, general governance requirements, always handling various types of litigation and customer complaint matters involving banks and all types of professionals of the financial sector. He has participated over the years in a number of working groups of the Luxembourg Bankers Association, BBL, on various regulatory matters, such as MiFID I, II, PSD, etc., and also had the chance in the past to participate in working group of the Commission de surveillance du secteur financier in Luxembourg. Glenn is also member of the Legal Affairs Committee, as well as the Professional Obligations Committee of the ABBL. He is a guest lecturer at the University of Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne for the Master 2 degree in Banking and Financial Law, at the University of Luxembourg for the Master 2 degree in European Banking and Financial Law, as well as in Contract Law in the context of the Luxembourg Bar exam. Glenn is also the author of various publications. He is contributor for Luxembourg to the ASML section of the Responsible Art Market Initiative RAM in collaboration with Thierry André. I warmly thank Mr. Emmanuel van der Putte, Senior Director, Managing Director of Sotheby Brussels and Luxembourg. Emmanuel joined Sotheby in 2013. He started his career as director of the Belgian auction house Lamperts, before moving to Christie's Impressionist and Modern Art department as a specialist between Paris, London, and Brussels. He also worked as managing director of Chester Collections in Geneva, a company specializing in the management of private art collections. Emmanuel has a pan-European experience and renowned specialist knowledge that has allowed him to develop close contact with many important collectors in a number of fields, making him a key contributor to Sotheby's major European actions. Specialist of the 19th century European paintings, Belgian art, 19th and 20th century. Additionally, Emmanuel serves on the scientific committees of various foundations. He is also an accomplished author, with his recent publication encompassing 2 books about painters from 19th and 20th century, the French naturalist painters, 1819-1915, and Les peintres de la forêt de Soignes, Jean Dardin de Bruxelles, 1890-1950. His experience as a director of a renowned auction house will be invaluable to us on today's subject. Finally, I would like to extend my warmest thanks to Dr. Stephan Zilkens, who is also doing us the honor of being with us today. Dr. Stephan Zilkens is managing partner of Zilkens Fine Art Insurance GmbH, with almost 40 years of experience in insurance. Stephan Zilkens received his doctorate from the University of Cologne. His insurance career began as an art historian at Northern Allgemeine Versicherung AG in 1983, where he helped build up the German art insurance business and was responsible for sales, operations, and claims. From 1990 to 2010, he worked for 2 insurance companies and 2 insurance brokerage houses as division manager, board member, and managing director. He led Gotha to market leader in the field of wind turbine insurance. His broad experience in various fields of the insurance market makes him an ideal partner for developing individual insurance solutions outside also of art insurance. In 2010, he founded Zilkens Fine Art as insurance broker GmbH in Köln. More than 10 years ago, he launched the Cologne Fine Art Insurance Talks, take place during the Art Cologne to discuss current topics of fine art insurance. The annually invited representatives on the panel are art collectors, gallery owners, experts of fine art shippers, and insurance company or politicians active in cultural affairs. In 2022, he was the ideator and supporter of the pop-up exhibition, Was Fine For, Artists for Ukraine, within the framework of Art Cologne in November 2022, an optimal period open on up to the exhibition to offer Ukrainian artists an international visibility. Do not miss Dr. Zilkens' comment quickly on current event concerning art under Zilkens' news blog and Kobel's Art Weekly annotated press review on the art market by Stephan Kobel. After this long introduction, let's go down to the heart of the concern. What exactly is art due diligence? Due diligence forms an essential part of art transaction, investigating and obtaining as much information as possible about the parties to the proposed transaction, the artwork on the transaction itself, protects art businesses and collectors, and helps art businesses manage their reputational and financial risks. Gathering and holding such information may entail additional responsibilities, particularly in terms of data protection, where personal information relating to individuals is concerned. What is a risk-based approach and how do I apply it? A risk-based approach means identifying and undertaking the risk to which you are exposed, establishing your appetite for risk and taking commensurate measures to mitigate the risk effectively and efficiently. To establish the risk profile of a potential transaction, it is helpful to consider the following: the nature of the client, are they existing client who is well known to the art business or a new client? the nature of the artwork. It is a high or low value. Does it have characteristics which make it sensitive or which require further investigation? Has it been authenticated in the past? The nature of the transaction, it is taking place through intermediaries, face-to-face, or entirely via the internet or other non-face-to-face means. It is unusually complex. Higher risk factors include clients who are PAPEs, who are associated with PAPEs, artworks without an established and verified provenance, transactions which occur entirely via non-face-to-face means or which are unusually complex. Lower risk factors include long-standing clients with a clean transaction record, authenticated artworks with an established and verified provenance, transactions which take place to face or which involve low-value artworks. What is due diligence? Due diligence is commonly defined as actions that is considered responsible for people to be expected to keep themselves or others on their property safe. Cambridge Advanced Learner Dictionary. In practice, it is about asking the right questions, obtaining and verifying information, and applying common sense. Why is due diligence important? For anyone involved in our transaction, due diligence is important for managing reputational and financial risks. Situations where due diligence is required include acquisitions, sales, donations, loans, and exchange of artworks, management of our collections by fiduciary service providers and advisors, financial transactions and investments involving artworks, including loans secured against artworks, curation of exhibition and art fairs, arranging insurance, storage, and/or transportation of artworks. This conference aims to demystify the collecting journey through an interactive dialogue on practical tips with a panel of art market professionals by addressing the three specific themes: client due diligence, seller's credential, intermediaries and their authority to act, sanctions and red flags checks, artwork due diligence, identification of ownership, artwork location and recent movement, forensic analysis including provenance research, condition and authenticity, transactions on due diligence, purpose and form of the transaction, source of funds and documentation, litigation risk and regulatory risk, including import and export restriction, application of anti-money laundering laws. First of all, I would like to start this discussion with you, Glenn, to find out about the state of anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing legislation applicable to art in Luxembourg. What are the main trends that you have noticed in this area in recent years? What is now legally required for art transactions in Luxembourg?
Thank you, Eric. I realize that the exhibition is in its last preparatory stages. There's a lot of noise, so I hope everyone can hear us more or less well in that regard. So let's demystify a bit the material. I mean, a lot of people have heard a lot about IML because of the recent FATA visit in Luxembourg. And indeed, it is, in this sector, I would say that the penetration of these requirements has, let's say, progressed quite rapidly in recent years. I mean, you must realize that before 2008, nobody was subject in this sector more globally to any sort of these due diligence. Eric, you were referring to the word due diligence. Due diligence is actually, you can even describe it more generally, more simply, as saying, know your client or know your transaction, know your counterpart. And in that field, so 2008, it's the third directive that has been transposed. It has been very subtle. There's a very small hyphen in the law that says these KYC duties have to be applied by anyone that deals in goods, being understood that also including art, but only to the extent that they accept cash payments exceeding 10,000. So that was in 2008, already first threshold, sorry, it was 15,000 by the way. And then in 2018, there was a transposition of another directive. It still kept that in the general category. Persons dealing as traders in goods of high value, but this time acceptance of payment in cash was lowered to 10,000. So anyone that was doing anything below these thresholds was not in the field of the law. You don't have to do any KYC. Thank you. And then gradually, lately in 2020, there was yet another directive. Sorry to repeat about yet another directive, but so you will have some empathy for my work on a daily basis. I have to catch up with a lot of these texts that change all the time. And there they more specifically said, anyone that deals, that trades, that stores in the art sector has to be subject to KYC in Luxembourg. And there is no longer a limit of cash payments or not, but there is a value of transaction limit. It has to be exceeding 10,000 euros. Below, you wouldn't be subject to, but there is one catch in the law. You can even have to do it with a value that is below 10,000 when there is a series of transactions that appear to be linked. Then you have to do this grouping, the aggregation, and you would have to do KYC. Voilà. Eric, a lot of people talk about KYC. I hope that I demystified a little bit who is subject to. So auction houses, galleries, whether they act as intermediary or counterparties to that, and anyone else that has a professional scale does in any way participate in this trade of art sector globally will be subject to this.
Okay. Thank you. First time, client due diligence. And Glenn, can you tell us if there is a difference for an individual and for legal entity, such as company, or any other legal entity? For an individual, how should an individual's identity be verified? On the basis of which documents? Are there specific screening services that can be used, PEP on sanctioned list? For a legal person, such as a company, a trust, etc., how should its identity to be verified? On the basis of which documents?
Okay, I'll demystify, but I'll keep it short and simple because the law is very complex. A natural person, if you have to do KYC on a natural person, there the textbook is quite easy. You have to gather a certain number of information, like name, date, place of birth, address, and so on. And then that is just gathering information. Then you have to verify that information. That means corroborating the information you got with an official document that certifies the authenticity to the information received. Voila. You give a passport copy, you give an ID copy. This is how in the traditional KYC sector you do KYC on a physical person. For legal entities, and there the lawyer has to speak, but he has to restrain himself this afternoon, so I'll keep it simple. A normal legal entity, you will take the equivalent to a physical person. What is that? That's information about the name of the entity, where it's established, its corporate seat, stuff like that. But legal entities have one particularity. You can create them quickly, and you can dissolve them quickly. So the up-to-date character of documentation in relation to a company is extremely important and much more simple. Our ID card sometimes expires, but we don't cease to be the person we are. It's just that we need to renew it. For a legal entity, you can actually dissolve it and revive it very often. So technically speaking, what you need to do is one thing. You need to get documentation from a register, a trade and companies register, that certifies basically that this entity is legally existing, so that it is live and running. So you get articles of incorporation or an excerpt for this. Voila. This is simple. Then when you come to a number of legal arrangements, trusts, foundations, you take basically the same rules, but they have to be adapted because the entity itself has different ways of functioning and therefore also of being required in terms of existence. So technically documentation changes slightly, Eric. Did I answer that in a simple manner? I look at the audience, just I'm checking. No one seems to be asleep. That's a good sign because normally nobody likes this material.
Emmanuel, can you tell about your approach to client due diligence? What do you think is the best practice in this area?
Thank you, Eric. I think I want to continue on what Glenn just said. It's very important for the art world that due diligence is in place, because it helps the market to prevent us to act in an illicit way, to act in money laundering, or to sell stolen goods or looted goods. So for that reason, it's not only a legal obligation, but it's also, and I refer to what you said, it's of course essential for reputation and for the art market in its general, for its integrity. So I would mention some points important for the due diligence in an auction house. Is that, of course, we had the definition of due diligence, but as Glenn said, the most important thing is know your client. Know your client is knowing to ask the right questions, ask them soon enough in the process, from the start, having all this information, like you said, the address, the copy of the ID. Utility bill is very important nowadays. I think it should be mentioned because people are always surprised to see that we ask for those utility bills. A bill of your heating company or water company. I think it confirms everything. Of course, you have the vendor and the buyer side, so you need also to see the source of funds. I think that's important. So third-party check with a bank. I think that's we didn't mention it yet, but I think that's a very important tool. The risk assessment, compliance, all documentation you can have, whatever, on that. And then maybe the most important thing, Glenn said that he has to keep up with legislation. We should do exactly the same, meaning there needs to be training, then we need to be informed, which is not always easy. In an auction house, we're specialists of different matters, but not always legal advisors. So we need to be informed, and the company needs to do their efforts to that. So I think that's important. Engage different experts, external experts. We surround by them, and then do the AML programs that are in place. So those are the elements that we see as important in this due diligence.
Thank you. Aude, the same questions. Can you tell us about your approach in terms of client due diligence?
Yeah, it's very similar to what Emmanuel said. We have two business units, art transactions and art finance. Art finance, we do it in a joint venture with a bank. So here we use the compliance department of the bank. So it's a whole KYC, AML as has been described. Another point which is important in the last 2 years is sanctions list. So it's very important to also check that the client is not on a sanction list. And what we've seen as a big change as a consequence of this new legislation is that it's cutting out the intermediaries. And Emmanuel, you will agree with me, there's been too many unprofessional intermediaries in this business. And now, whenever a transaction happens, you need to know who's the beneficial owner, whether it's an auction, whether it's an art transaction, finance. So it's bringing a lot of transparency. I mean, a lot. It's bringing some more transparency to the art market because it's cutting out all these intermediaries pretending to be for somebody you wouldn't know who it is. So I think that's a big change. And then the last part is which is not yet attained, and I know there's a push for it, but that will be very difficult. It's also to understand how the funds are used. So if you sell at an auction or you sell a transaction, you do financing, how are these funds used? So that's a point that we feel that there is some tension around, but I think that's going to be very difficult to impose on the art market.
Thank you. Dr. Zilkens and Stephan, is there anything else to add in point of view of the insurance?
Well, insurers are a little bit more, let's say, easygoing in that sense, because the 10,000 euro border, which is necessary to do the KYC, is applicable to the premium people have to say. And it takes quite an amount of insurance you have to insure to get up to 10,000. So the insurers have a little bit lower, let's say, borders where they have to do the KYC, but finally they do it as well, because they need to know who owns it. They need to know finally who is the one who is the one in case of a claim, the one who gets the payout of the claims. So it's a little bit less, but still there is quite a lot of regulation.
Thank you. The second term is artwork due diligence, and certainly the more important for us today. In terms of artwork due diligence, Emmanuel, can you tell us why the identification of an artwork is important?
Accurately describing a work of art or identifying it gives that, of course, legitimacy, historical context, value of the work, and legal compliance, which is important. So it plays a certain role in preserving the historical and cultural aspect of the record, ensuring transparent and ethical transactions, protecting the interests, of course, of the artist, the clients, and the whole market. So, of course, trade restrictions and sanctions can change the whole market. Reason why we have to be very aware of these. These restrictions are mainly implied by governments to apply some policy objectives that can have include political, economic, or cultural considerations. So therefore, art that identifying of artwork due diligence is key in our process, and I can develop it. You know, for an artwork, you have to first know who the owner is, which is sometimes very difficult already. So you need a provenance. You need provenance document. You need bills, of course, if it was bought in a gallery or an auction house, or if it was passed over through inheritance. You need to have those proofs. You can have also authentication documents by committees, which are very important in that artwork due diligence. And then there is also what you see in an auction house and an auction catalog. You'll have the description of the work, the provenance. Then you have also literature and exhibition. Those 2 points are very important. They help you to know who the owner is, to know the history of the work, and also to avoid all the restrictions we talked just priorly.
In terms of trade restrictions, what possible trade restrictions or sanctions must be considered? How can due diligence be reconciled with the need to protect cultural property and the free movement of goods in the European Union?
So just to understand the transport,
the trade restrictions.
Yes, the trade restrictions. Yes, the trade restrictions gives you, of course, you have to know law, regional law, local law, European law, international laws to be sure that when an artwork comes to you, it has had the right transportation or documentation to be shipped from one place to another. If that's not the first thing you have, you can't. You have to stick to what legally is binding. So those restrictions are key in helping you to identify and to be sure that the work is free of all those restrictions. So it's an additional tool that we need to apply to those works of art, and it gives us more security again for the buyers and the vendors. So those things are very important.
In terms of artwork due diligence, Aude, can you tell us about ownership of artwork? How can we check that persons offering the artwork for sale is actually the legitimate owner of the work? What specific situation required heightened due diligence in this respect? How do you ensure that artworks are not subject to security interest or other?
It's a very tough discussion. I mean, title ownership, it's not easy. So the obvious thing is, as you said, Emmanuel, it's an invoice. It's the name of the client or the company on the invoice. What we do very often, we ask, especially for art financing, we ask to see the bank extracts when the payment has been done to make sure that the funds have actually come from a bank account which belongs to the company or to the client. If the artwork is in a company, whether it's a trust or any other company, you need all the legal documentation. also if there's been a title transfer of ownership, which happens a lot because clients buy it themselves, or in a company they transfer it to another company. This needs all to be legally documented, and you need to have full documentation. Is there 100% certainty to be sure about title? No. There's always going to be, some potential question marks, especially when it comes to family, especially when it's like inheritance. You need to get the whole documentation about inheritance, make sure who are actually the people who inherited which artwork. Do they all agree to a sale, to a financing? Do they all sign the contracts? So it's quite a complex matter. I think that was another part of your question. It was ownership and how do you make sure that they don't have a security interest? You have in the US UCC filing, so you can find out if there's a security interest. In France, you have a pledge register that you can check. In the UK, sometimes there's a register, sometimes not. So it depends if it's a chattel mortgage or not. In most countries in Europe, you won't be able to check. Now, the art loss register, and we're going to talk about it in a bit because that's part of your due diligence process, making sure that the work is, not mentioned as stolen or looted with the art loss register. This is the basis of any due diligence. You can now also incorporate a security interest with the art loss register. So you can always check with the art loss register if there's a security interest. But again, in Europe, it's not perfect. So there's not a 100% way to get certainty about this.
Thank you. Emmanuel, some things to add in terms of ownership?
No, I think it's exactly the same process that we apply. Certainly, when you have what we call SFS, Sotheby's Financial Services, so advance payment on works that are consigned for auction or not. We have that financial tool that permits already for more than 40 years clients to put in collateral works of art, what banks are less doing for the last 20 years. We have that quick way of doing it, and also we can always reevaluate the work because we have our specialists in-house. So that's exactly the process we go through in that field too.
The provenance on the exhibition history, establishing the provenance historical record of ownership, and if applicable exhibition history of an artwork, can help establish the artwork authenticity, add to the artwork's value if it has a complete or distinguished ownership on exhibition history, help to prove ownership if legal title to the artwork is later contested. Conversely, the absence or the lack of a credible provenance can raise red flags regarding the artwork's attribution or authenticity. In the case of archaeological objects and cultural property, the absence of a veritable recent provenance could indicate that the item has been illegally removed from its source country. Aude, Emmanuel, can you tell us about your respective experience with the provenance of artworks?
Yeah, sure. So basically, as I said, you have to check the art loss register. You can have an extra access with Interpol. So for example, we have a reference name, and then you go into Interpol and you can check Kandinsky. What are all the Kandinskys which are referenced as stolen? So this is part of the checks. If the work has been produced between, let's say, if the work is older, before the Second World War produced, and there's some uncertainty about provenance between 1930 and 1945, you have to be extremely careful about looted artworks. And there's a profusion of different websites you can check. Some are US-based, some are German, some are European. So you have to go onto different websites and check if the work is not registered as a looted artwork. Otherwise, you could be in a restitution case, which would be a very big deal. As Emmanuel said, literature and exhibitions are extremely important because that's how you find out red flags. What we've seen in the past is that going back into the actual catalogs, you see suddenly that's different names, or it's not the same dates, or the title change of the artwork. That's always an indication that maybe something is wrong. So you're like a detective. You need to really take the time and check every little detail because it will be well hidden. So you're going to have to be really careful. And also sometimes the art trade changes, names. So I will give you a little story that we encountered. It was a Chagall, very nice Chagall, which was offered by a gallery, and I will not name it. And it had a certain title, and the client asked us about valuation. So we did some research, couldn't find any auction history on it. And then we found out that the title had been changed actually 5 years ago, because the seller didn't want, oops, the seller didn't want anyone to know that this work had been offered at auction at a much lower price and bought in, so nobody bought the work. So the value had actually a market price, but at a very low price. So they managed to change the title, and I don't know how they got a new certificate from the Comité Chagall with a new title. But so you have to always be, kind of patient and really do your research.
Just to continue on that, I think what is often overseen is the importance of archives, clients' archives, galleries' archives. In my daily work, I come often at clients' place, and of course I see works of art on the wall, but I also ask about the archives. Photos of the family photos. Of course, we talked about bills. That's the most easy thing. But letters that can help to establish that the work was already in the collection at a certain point, and also archives of galleries that disappeared. We saved in the last 3 years 2 archives from galleries from the 40s and the 50s in Belgium, and gave the archives to Fondation Roi Baudouin that offers it to one of the museum. I think that's an important work that we have to do too as an active member of the art market, and that helps not only us in our research but also others in the future in that process of authentication of the work. So, of course, committees, we talked about it. The change of a title in committee, I never heard about it. I'm quite interested in it. I think that's also problematic. Not all committees, I'm not talking about a Chagall one, but there's committees that come and go, which doesn't help the market either. The legislation for committees is becoming strong. It depends on the countries where you are. Committee should be a large team, not only one person. There is a lot of things to do also in that sense, to make it clearer to the market, to potential clients or vendors. I think that's also something that should be addressed in the future. But there is so much research to do for the authenticity. Of course, the art bases, art loss registers, we talked about it. I think expert opinions of others, I think it's also an important additional tool to help you.
Stephan, can you tell us about your experience with art provenance?
Well, I just want to drop 2 names. The one is Beltracchi, which is probably known, and the other one is Gurlitt. And if you just see what happened behind, if you take Beltracchi, he himself was sentenced for roughly 10 falsifications, but he was pretending to have placed inside museums and private collections roughly 600 works from artists. Nobody knows which ones are behind them. And for insurance companies, it's definitely very, very complicated to define it because, well, you have the insurers you can divide. You have those with know-how. They have their own art historians and people being able a little bit to do artwork due diligences. And you have the others who only deliver, let's say, binding capital. And then, well, they just take the premium for granted, fine. And then you have the problem in case of a claim. But it's always a discussion, where does the work come from, what is the drain of authenticity and so on. And if you take the Gurlitt case, that's even a much more complicated thing because, well, these items were insured while the German state was keeping them for analyzing the whole situation. And then in the press you had huge amounts which had to be insured, so 1 billion or something. But finally, if you look at the single work and you try to compare them with their market value, you come much lower. You come down to 100 or something. So in that chain of authenticity, there is a lot of discussion also for insurance companies, but it depends who you are talking to, what kind of result you're finally having. And some insurers accept, as they deliver innocent capacity, they accept any kind of value. So, and that's interesting for financing people who try to use art as, let's say, backup and security for certain financial constructions. So it's all around.
Authenticity is key, and fakes and forgery and misattribution are perceived as a major risk for buyers in art transactions. A fake artwork or one of whose authenticity is difficult or impossible to establish with a high degree of certainty will lose its commercial value and can represent a total loss for the buyer. With the professionalization of the art market, higher standards of due diligence are expected of art market actors. The reputational and financial consequence of our business and also extremely high. Determining authenticity is a complex task, and the checks undertaken will depend on the artwork. Where there is doubt, typically on the following three areas will be explored in conjunction to give an overall picture of authenticity: expert opinion, provenance and art historical research, and scientific testing. Aude, Emmanuel, can you explain us your experience in terms of authenticity? How do you work in this matter?
So I'll give you an example, authenticity, yes, if you would like. I have a quite interesting one with a Magritte. Let's take the most famous Belgian artist, which achieved the highest price last year in our auctions. 6 years ago, I'm contacted by a family that wants to sell a Magritte painting, very nice work, landscape, moonlight, and with a tree in the middle, and the landscape is like a very light mountain on the background. And the painting had been submitted to the foundation, and that's interesting to go back on this discussion of the foundation in 2000-2002. At that time, the Magritte Foundation was organizing their sessions in London, and it had been dismissed. The painting had some issues. First issue is a title on the back with an error in French. Never a good news for the artist to have to write badly his own title. And it was not manuscript, it was in capital letters. It seemed a bit strange. And at the same time, no one knew the painting. They had never seen it. It was not in the archives. There was no photograph of it. The first catalogue raisonné ever done by David Sylvester was not mentioning it, which was, he worked 25 years on the catalogue, so he knew about it. But it was something strange. We believed there was something more to it. So we did a full research on the work. We had it scanned, X-ray scanned. We had pigment analysis, and after we had the X-ray scan, we saw the painting and the scan, and we saw that there was an underlying drawing. So we tried to understand what it was. So it was the same tree, but other branches to the tree, and the landscape was different. It was higher and different. So we tried to find in the catalogue raisonné some works of him from that period. It was around during the wartime, 41, 42. He has an exhibition at the Gallery Lou Cousin, where he has a selection of tree paintings. So we find the archives of Lou Cousin there. It so happens that we had just found in the basement of a nephew of a partner of Lou Cousin the archives. So we have the archives. We can use it for our own research, and we find that he sells 2 of the paintings, and the third one he takes back home. So that photograph is published in the catalogue raisonné of David Sylvester and had disappeared. So we try to, so it's a small photograph. So there is no original photograph anymore. So we have to try to make it bigger and to superpose it. And we find out that it's the underlying drawing of that painting. So by matching that drawing with the initial painting, we understand that Magritte took it back home, didn't like it, didn't like the composition, it didn't sell, so he repaints it around 42, 43, and sells it in the 50s. And it was in that collection since the 50s. So we make a full dossier with the archives of the Lou Cousin gallery, with a technical analysis of a specialist, and we submit it to the committee, 30 pages, which helps them to confirm the authenticity of the work. So when I was contacted by the clients, the work was the value of the frame, which was 50 euros. And by the end, we were able to sell it in a London sale in 2016. It was sold for 1.99. So there you see that doing the research, which is something auction houses didn't have time for in the past. It's something we quite recent in the last 10 years. I think our specialists are passionate about their works of art. It's not just selling and buying. We don't sell only things that we receive. We also do the additional research. By doing that research, you see that you can help vendors, but also increase the knowledge in the art market.
Thank you. Aude, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is always looking at the catalogue raisonné, right? And what do you do if the work is not in the catalogue raisonné? So you have the problem with Modigliani. You have 4 catalogue raisonnés, but only one which is considered as a reference, the Cerrone one. So, but there's no new expert. So how do you deal with it? No solution. You have the problem with Malevich. I mean, you have a number of artists we just can't take for financing because there's just, nobody nowadays who takes this time and tries to do the research and make sure that all the experts agree. So, as I said, for us, the first thing we do is looking into the catalogue raisonné, looking at the certificates, but it's not enough. So when we get a certificate, we actually write to the committee, to the foundation, and check the number and the certificate with their own databases, because we've seen the case of a Giacometti with a fake certificate. So, due diligence means not just doing the first initial steps, it means being really thorough and going the extra mile, especially when we talk about artworks which are, very valuable. Then you have to really be extremely careful.
Stephan, in terms of authenticity, what's the main problems you encountered for insurance? How are the risks covered? Does this often lead to lawsuits?
Well, I start at the end. Insurers try to avoid any kind of lawsuits. So that's the best they can do, because otherwise they jeopardize the very difficult grade and recognition they have in public. On the other hand, take simple things like everybody who is a little bit of my age or older knows the man with the golden helmet from Rembrandt. We all learned this is Rembrandt. It was in all catalogue raisonnés, as you put it. Nowadays, most art historians deny that it's a Rembrandt. So the iconographic major piece now is no longer a Rembrandt. That has a huge impact on the value. And while insuring it, you are always, you have to ask yourself, what kind of amount do you accept for such a painting, which is no longer in the agenda. Let's put it that way. And for insurance, that's, let's say, it only comes to a problem when there is a claim, because then they see that they have a certain responsibility towards the actioneers and stakeholders. And then it can be very tricky because between underwriting, which is the side who accepts the risks, and claims, which is the side who is finally responsible for the realization of the product, there are Chinese walls. And that is due to politicians who think that is very compliant, that underwriting and claims are separated, and they sometimes even don't speak with each other. And that makes it even more difficult, because the know-how about the art market and so forth is with the underwriting and not on the claim side. So for brokers from time to time, it's a heavy work to push insurance companies into the right direction, especially when authenticity questions are tricky.
Thank you. It is advisable to gather and share as much information as possible of the art composition, condition, or recommended conservation, the materials used in their work, as well as the artwork's condition, and the presence of any restoration can impact the artwork's present and future value. An original artwork which has been highly or improperly restored can lose an important part of its value. the risk of contestation and therefore of lawsuits for lack of information or incorrect information regarding the state of conversation of the artwork, how to prevent such a risk? Stephan, can you tell us about your experience with the condition of artworks?
Well, condition is a major, and especially during exhibitions or transports, it's very important to have a perfect condition report up front. But the problem is condition checks are made by human beings. So you have one restorer doing it in Luxembourg, then it moves to Brussels. You have a different one taking the same picture, having the papers, looking at it, but seeing the work in front totally different. So he determines claims where there hadn't been claims because it's part of the inherent situation of the work. And you can add a lot of things like this. So in this respect, we need much more technical support of documentation, which is about to come into the world. But for insurance companies, especially condition reporting and the totally variety of condition reporting is a major problem and an issue.
Thank you. And to conclude this conference, which the transaction due diligence, understanding the background and purpose of the transaction is helpful to establish the risk profile of the transaction and to inform of the level of diligence the art business should carry out. Art businesses should examine in particular the purpose of the transaction, the form and structure of the transaction, the source of funds, the documentation supporting the transaction. Any activity relating to a proposed transaction that is not consistent with what is known about the client on the client's risk profile or which otherwise raise red flags should be subject and enhanced due diligence by the art business. Such enhanced due diligence could include asking for additional information or documentation on the key elements of the transaction, such as the context of the transaction, the source of funds, and the structure of the transaction. Glenn, what are the transactions red flags to be checked? In terms of form and structure of the transaction, what elements of the form and structure of the transaction may give rise to doubts and so to ask further information to the client?
We need to approach it from a, again, demystifying angle this evening. Emmanuel's example, I believe, is a very good illustration. You do a deep dive. Whenever you have a higher risk, for instance, in terms of provenance, for instance, in terms of lack of knowledge of your counterparty, this is someone that is not used to be active in the art market, especially on the secondary market. It raises more risks than the primary market. These are patterns that I would say would invite you to do exactly what they did. Deep dive, conduct more investigations. And then there's a golden rule in KYC. Common sense. What doesn't feel right is very often not right. So technically speaking, someone, for instance, goes to the market, says, I'm interested in art. I want to invest. Great. What are your areas of interest? Anything. That's the first red flag. It might be right, though. But normally, this is not the first point of answer. You must not forget, we said at the beginning, it's not only about legal obligation, we need to preserve the reputation of a market. We need to protect the art market. But that means also not letting launderers in. These people have normally generated proceeds from illegal activities and they want to invest. Why? Not because they love the art market. It's just because it's a market where a certain level of maturity of these rules is probably not as ripe as it is in the financial sector. So they want to take benefit of this so that later on, once they have invested, they can resell it again, and then they have done exactly what they wanted. They have laundered the proceeds. So another risk, I would say, is whenever the number of intermediaries grows incrementally, or whenever you use very complex structures, because then comes in another trendy word. You need to find out who is the beneficial owner. You need to find who's the guy behind these structures. And trust me, these guys have gone very sophisticated. They can create so many layers that it becomes difficult. So again, it becomes time consuming but you have no choice. If you want to protect the market, you need to find out who's behind. There you would recommend perhaps a more deep dive, and then recognize, for instance, if there is someone that was active in a looting sector, or that was thrown into a sector that was perhaps, I'm not saying now an example that is more geopolitically recent, but perhaps somewhere in the Middle East, where there have been in recent years a lot of lootings. Someone that would be more prone to these sectors would obviously, from geographical risk perspective, be higher risk. Then, never forget, source of funds is important. Now we turn it again in the direction of protecting the sector. Someone that has illegal proceeds, he wants to invest. Why? Because he wants that to be turned. La machine à laver, it turns, makes a lot of circles, and at the end of the day, what is the object? To conceal, to make it irretraceable in terms of where the money comes from, because then you have laundered. So source of funds is extremely important. Aude was referring to an example where she said we work with banks because we want to make sure that we have some sort of guarantees where, always makes me smile. We want to have some sorts of guarantees where the money comes from, because it's extremely important. It doesn't replace your KYC, but it's important that you ask these questions. And we have gone now to a sector, Eric, I remember like 20 or 25 years ago, everyone was saying to a bank, why are you asking all these questions? This is my privacy. Well, thanks to KYC and this sector, the veils have lifted to an utmost extent, and there is simply no choice to this. A very last point I would say is in that respect also the digital market. And I mean, the digital market is a new market. It's a market that offers plenty of, let's say, new interests, different parts of the population also that were perhaps traditionally less prone to interest in art have now gone crazy interest about that. I mean, I have a boy that is 15 years old and another one that is 13, and even they talk to me about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, that we need to invest. And there, the question is again, where this is a digitalized form of a token, technically that represents a piece, let's say, of art in a large sense. It can be picture, it can be video game, it can be, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, whatever. But nowadays, this market is less mature. So there's less database. There's less credentials available. So it will be very difficult to verify what is the fair value to this. So the risk of overvaluation and undervaluation, which are important threats to the sector here, Eric, are much more, let's say, important. Last but not least, these pieces of art in a more digitalized world now, which are very trendy, and I must say they are very fascinating, but they are no longer necessarily dealt with by the traditional channels. There are new market players that deal with them. And you can buy that with a traditional gallery or with a traditional art place. But nowadays you have digital marketplaces where you can buy these. And there, of course, verification of authenticity, of provenance, that is become much more difficult because these marketplaces are not yet regulated. So MiCA and all what you have heard, they do not regulate these marketplaces yet. So it has a, let's say, watch out, be cautious in that respect, although we all like the wave and the trend.
To conclude the documentation, it is important to document transactions and movement in artworks fully and correctly. This puts our business in a better position if they are later required to provide some information in the context of an investigation or in the dispute subsequently arise. Art businesses minimize their legal, reputational, and financial risk by being able to demonstrate and prove the circumstances of the transaction and the due diligence measures they carry out at that time. Holding personal data on individuals may also entail data protection obligation, which should be considered are compliant with the prescribed by applicable law. Aude, Emmanuel, in your respective experience, What is the preferred form of art transaction? And what documents do I need to collect to trace the movement of works of art?
The more straightforward, the better. I mean, we prefer when you do a transaction to do it directly with the ultimate beneficiary. He buys it in his name, in his company name, straightforward, no intermediaries, everything is clean and clear. What we don't do is transaction where there's multiple intermediaries and somebody gets to pay this amount and that amount. No, it's the person who buys the work will buy it with his company, with his own funds, and he gets an invoice. We do the whole AML, KYC. And if we do it for art financing, we are doing more complex structures because we're also working with a bank. So we might have multiple companies, trusts, beneficiaries. So here we are at another level, but everything is done, purely on a compliance basis. We are audited, so every year the auditor is going to check all the documentation. So yeah, you have to actually do exactly the same as you would in a bank transaction. It's very similar nowadays.
Thank you, Aude. I think you said everything I would have said. The only thing is, of course, there are different channels. There is galleries, there is auction houses, there are different intermediaries, direct intermediaries, not the ones that we are trying to avoid in the sales. Documentation. I think that's what we should say at the buyer side and the vendor side. It helps you in the future. It gives security for yourself, for your collection, and it also ensures that the market in the future will be clean of lots of problems that we will encounter in any case.
I think you're making a very good point, because what we don't realize is that as a buyer, you also want everything to be documented, because if you don't do it now, in 10 years from now, and you want to sell your artwork, nobody's going to buy it if you don't have the full documentation. So I think it's not only on our side, it's actually also for the collector extremely important to make sure that everything is really documented.
Stephan, did you involve in transaction involving of working out? Which document will work for you at more closely? Which elements may raise your suspicion?
Well, normally insurance comes last. That's the first thing.
We're doing a good job.
Yeah, so we have to rely on the good jobs which have been done before, but finally, and it depends on the channel. Sometimes we get the information from forwarders, from transporters, having the duty to transfer it from X to Y. And then we just get the amount, the name of the artwork, the packing, and the conveyance, and that's it. So for insurance companies, it's always very difficult to follow up, because in this process, as it is quite easy at the moment to get enough capacity even for bigger deals, they are regarded as the behind point. So rarely they intervene, and there is not the problem.
And to conclude, another important aspect that needs to be addressed here is the question of taxation of VAT on art transaction. Why are these questions so essential?
With an art transaction is often at the end. Yeah, now they're cutting the microphone. It's done. So I will do it in 2 sentences. Yeah, the bad surprise often comes at the end with a VAT. If it's with an auction house, they will already announce it and make you conscious that you have to take into account. But private transactions with galleries, they don't always think about the cross-border issues. Not only it's about the export licenses that you need to have and restrictions to get artworks out of certain countries, but also, is it an import tax? Is it a VAT on the full amount? So it can change a lot in a transaction of several million. It can be a very bad surprise. And I've seen clients working with galleries where at the end, at the moment of payment, oh wow, there's 17% VAT. Oh, okay, who's paying that now? And then there's a big complication. So that's something to take into account upfront.
Thank you. I would like to thank you, all the panelists, for their pertinent and useful answers to the questions posed. And now it's time to turn the audience to find out what questions they would like to ask you.
Thank you, everyone. As we has already said, we have a couple of minutes for some questions. We have another conference after this, so if somebody would like to ask a question, now is the moment. Yeah, please.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question for Aude Lemogne. In terms of the paperwork that you have to fill up every day in terms of AML, these regulations have affected your work on a day-to-day basis. Can you just tell us how you deal with it?
Well, basically, well, it's like any business. I mean, I sit on boards of insurance companies. You know, you have to have your AML policy in place with your risk-based approach, and you will just follow basically your policy, do checks on a regular basis, and you're up to date. And it takes time, but it doesn't change that much in the sense that working with people who are not ready to give you the documentation is anyways, certainly going into disaster. So it's just, actually for me, it gives you the tools to demand that everybody is at the same level and that everybody is really like at the same level of transparency. So, a lot of people come into the art market saying, oh, wow, somebody came with this work and I can find somebody who's going to buy it. It's not how the art market works. A transaction is something which is carefully crafted, and you need to do this documentation. You need to know who are these people anyways, because otherwise there's a lot of possible pitfalls in a transaction.
May I just offer an additional idea? Aude was referring to a potential pitfall. It is a huge pitfall, because not doing KYC, you must know that you are subject to criminal sanctions. And I think no one really would like to enjoy that, and doing the arbitrage between a bit of paperwork, Donald, and going on the criminal sanction side. Well, my choice is easily done.
I will ask the last question and also close the conference, because as we've heard, there's another conference following ours. All these good people will go out now to the fair and buy artworks, hopefully, and support our galleries. So what advice are you giving them? They're probably all very confused. Can they buy artworks here in the galleries? What kind of questions should they ask? So we start with Aude.
Ask about the artist's oeuvre. I mean, if you see work you really like, go back and ask the gallery about what he has done in the past, to see if you like really his style, if it's a one-off or if it's something which is like really representing of his artwork. If they have, like, a lot of galleries now have amazing educational programs, videos with the artist where he explains his work. So take a bit of time to discuss and also step back, because sometimes you see something, you're like, wow, I love it. But it's eye candy, and like 3 hours later, you're gonna be like, yeah. And then there's other stuff, you're like, oh no, I don't like it, but I have to stare at it, but I don't like it. And then that's the stuff that sticks sometimes. So, take your time, do some work, read the material, and you will make the right choice.
Glenn, sorry, 1 second. Glenn, as a lawyer, what is your advice?
Well, obviously, if you're buying, I think we voiced today a lot of guidance on what is that you need to do. And I think that obviously taking a bit a citizenship card today, this auction, or let's say the art fair, takes place on the Luxembourg soil. I wish that to have some guarantees of authenticity. And as my good friend David is part of the organization, I add another label of authenticity to them that you have not added, and welcome anyone else to the... No, but on a serious note, I obviously believe that we are probably on the risk side on the more lower end at this level. But as Aude said, and I believe it's important, think about it not twice, but get your documentation. Because eventually over the years, you might want to dispose of that. You don't have proper documentation. I'm not an expert like the guys on my right side, but I suppose you have a hard time in the future to sell it if you don't have proper documentation.
So, Emmanuel, I buy today, I trade tomorrow via Sotheby's. What is your advice?
So first of all, you only buy what you like. I think that's the best advice ever. An investment, it's maybe another discourse that we can have. I don't believe in it. Buy what you like, but be informed. Check with others. Ask advice to different people. Get the right information. I think we discussed it all, and keep your bill. Keep the bills. Keep photos of the painting or the sculpture at the fair. All those elements help afterwards to create that provenance that we all need to sell it further.
Good. Stephan, I buy it for 100. At which price should I insure it? Do
If
I
you buy
already
it for-
expect that tomorrow it will be worth 120?
If you buy it for 100, insure it for 100. There is no immediate rise in price just because you bought it, or probably because you bought it. There is a rise in price.
Good. Your question.
Sorry. Hi. My question actually is in the area of AML checks and the potential legal implication for me as an art advisor who acts as an intermediary between my client and the gallery. And the reason why I do that is that sometimes you chase the galleries around for your commission, and to sort all that out, the funds come to me and they actually invoice me. Sometimes, in my experience, I've realized that galleries, especially quite established galleries, when it's over the 10,000, they don't actually do the due diligence. Sometimes they just do it for me, but not on the owner of the work. And they have a lot of sort of back and forth argument with me saying that I'm wrong about what the legal implications might be. And then sometimes with clients, especially Swiss clients, seem to think that they're exempt from the AML checks. And I just wanted to know what the potential implication is to me as an advisor having to manage this sort of issues.
A short answer, but she's an intermediary, right? And so she's covered.
So
Caught, not covered. Caught.
You're mitgegangen, mitgefangen, mitgehangen. So that's a German thing of saying you were with them, you were caught with them, you will be hanged with them. Now, on a serious note, be careful about your interactions. Be careful about, a lot of people believe having been exempted, which are technically not. As I said, this is a sector that is more recently briefed up in the speed of KYC. So knowledge, raising awareness has not yet perhaps penetrated all areas. It is perhaps a good indication to change gallery or to choose another one that can protect yourself.
Good. On that note, I want to close the conference and thank our panelists